course. We're getting near to the end, and actually we're getting very close to the end of the Kahn book. What I'd like to do in this lecture is a couple things. First off, I want to make some comments about those end-of-term papers. Don't forget, we don't have a final exam. Instead, it's a paper, 5 pages, that's it. And I've got very detailed instructions. I'm going to revisit Bourdieu's idea of capital, especially cultural capital. And I'm revisiting it because the last chapter in the Kahn book is very much about this concept. And then I'm going to talk about 2 interpretations of Bourdieu's idea. These are interpretations that are kind of critiquing Bourdieu. So as I've talked about a lot, the Kahn book is really kind of building on these concepts now that are 30 years old or so and saying, how do they work? Do they work in this particular context of St. Paul's? Well, other sociologists have asked similar questions about Bourdieu's powerful ideas about the role of culture in society, particularly how culture produces inequality. And we're going to explore a couple of those because they're operating in the background of Kahn's chapter. He is in conversation with these other scholars. So one will be talking about this concept of boundaries. The other will be talking about this idea of multicultural capital, which, oh, I'm realizing my ink is kind of not dark here. I hope you can see it. But which, if you read closely, you'll see that Kahn actually talks about this idea specifically, multicultural capital, and an associated concept called omnivorism. So first off, your papers. I have put very specific directions on the website on D2L for you to look at. I don't do that simply to try and make a assignment hard. Instead, especially for a lot of you that aren't sociology majors, I want to focus you, give you just a limited thing to be thinking and talking about, and then let you go with it. So I actually try to really focus it in so you know exactly what you need to be doing. Should be pretty straightforward, but basically you're selecting a particular chapter from Kahn. I laid out 3 choices for you, and then I said each of these chapters is basically about a certain theme. So if you pick one chapter, you're going to be focusing on this theme more or less. And then for each chapter, I've put one major sociological article that is about the same topic. So if you pick chapter 3, then you'll read one article in a peer-reviewed journal that is about the same concept as chapter 3. You'll have to summarize the arguments, so give me a sense of what Kahn is talking about, give me a sense of what this article is talking about, and then you got to put it all together. So you got to put these in conversation with each other. So this is your chance to really use your noodle to think about the arguments that are going on here. Is Kahn making his arguments right in conversation with this other article? Is there things he could have done better? Is there ways that the other scholarship in this other article could help him think through his evidence a little bit more? That sort of topic. So it's pretty straightforward, 5 pages. I've got all the details there. You'll need to make sure you look closely at the due date and time, and then when that's done, you will load that up to D2L. D2L now has functionality where all the papers are run through turnitin.com, and then I grade them, and that's it. Let me be really clear here. Almost every single course I teach, there's 1, sometimes 2 students that plagiarize in these papers. Don't be the person that plagiarizes. If you're not sure what plagiarism is, then look in the syllabus. I have a link to University of Arizona resources about it. Really quickly, it is using somebody else's either direct words or lots of their ideas without giving them correct citation. Now, in the paper instructions, I have shown you, or I have specifically said, there's only really 3 sources you should be looking at. The Kahn book, the article that's mentioned in the paper assignment, and the third is our course lectures. That's it. I can guarantee you there's no other resource out there that's going to know more about how to put this together than your own brain is at this point if you've been keeping up with the course. So that's it. Stick with those, do those, and then I can grade the papers on just what's there instead of any of you that trip up either intentionally or unintentionally in putting somebody else's work into it. So don't be that person. Thinking in terms of our course, this is this is about kind of a purity line. Think back to Mary Douglas. This is an action that's important to a university, that is academic integrity and honesty. It's hard to patrol, so therefore I make a big stigma out of it, all right? So don't go over that line. All right, now let's jump in. to the rest of this lecture. Recall, let me talk first about kind of revisiting Bourdieu's arguments. Recall that one of the neat things about Pierre Bourdieu is he gave us these different ways of thinking about inequality. So we had these ideas of economic capital, cultural capital, and also symbolic capital. We haven't talked a lot about that last, but we have, for example, last week in the Kahn book, explored another type of capital, embodied capital, which Bourdieu didn't talk much about, but which Kahn and other scholars think is pretty important. How our actual bodies, the looks and movements of our bodies, can be used in social spheres to display certain images and to create exclusion and inequality. So keep in mind that this idea of capital is an important one for Bourdieu. And in his argument, cultural capital, if you remember, was always about the ability of elites to develop elite tastes. So to read the right books, to go to the right plays, to be able to buy the right music, to eat at the right restaurants. And so there was this sense that taste offset from those people who had poor taste or bad decisions about their clothing or their music or their food and that sort of thing. And what Bourdieu argued was, especially in a democratic society, cultural capital, so these elite tastes, these tastes that are hard to accrue unless you've been in certain environments like university environments or elite secluded environments, this cultural capital can help to kind of win or be powerful in certain social situations and social settings, even if somebody doesn't have a lot of economic capital. So remember, he was showing us that there's really these number of types of capital that can be used in any kind of given social context. And he kind of opened our eyes to this idea that what seemed like very normal natural processes of I like to use china at home. I like to use I like to invite my family over spontaneously. I like to sing after meals. Or in the case of the Kahn book, this embodied capital of what bodies and the kind of ease and showing ability to just kind of do things, working hard but having the ability to not work hard, that these kind of seemingly natural everyday sort of distinctions actually can be quite powerful in hiding inequality and also recreating inequality. So as maybe a quick visual example, one thing to think about with Bourdieu is he would oftentimes talk about this idea of field. So for example, this square, and I'll put two axes here, the x-axis and the y-axis, we'll call this the field of education. And we'll call this axis here cultural capital, cultural, and this axis here economic capital. So this is more economic capital going this way, and this is more cultural capital. So if we were a rich person, had a whole bunch of money, we're going to be higher on this economic capital strain. And it's likely, especially in the old days of the old elite, who Kahn talked about in the early 20th century, be pretty easy to get into Harvard, Princeton, all these elite places, right? So we'd say those kind of old elite would be right in this area, right here. Well, Bourdieu, when he was studying, he noticed this funny thing where in France, for example, and in the United States, actually in the good old days of the University of California system, when it was much more equitable, all sorts of people could get into a university. So you didn't have to have much economic capital to get into a university. So maybe, especially with kind of mass openness of California universities and programs like affirmative action in particular, it was possible to not have much economic capital and you could still get in. But what Bourdieu noticed was even in these so-called democratic, equitable, not economically determined environments, people still had a way of distinguishing themselves. And it was often by deploying cultural capital. So we might have this group eventually starts displaying their taste, that they can go to the right parties and have the right music and live in the right neighborhoods and drive the right cars. And this was a strategy by which to recreate inequality, especially if people in this group didn't have a chance to accrue that sort of cultural capital. So what Bourdieu shows us is that there's there's always kind of these relationships in any kind of field where power is something that can be won or accrued in social interactions, and that these positions relate to each other. So as one thing changes, or one group changes or has access to what used to be non-elite environments, then other groups will kind of react to that and will continue to distinguish themselves, continue to make distinctions, oftentimes in these kind of hidden cultural ways. And Kahn has really helped to take us through and show in the United States this is really nefarious right now because there's been this great breakdown so that classes do interact, but as Kahn is showing us, there's still ways that the new elite today has found to create distinctions. So despite St. Paul's having, people on this whole spectrum of economics here, within St. Paul's there's still distinctions based on embodied capital, for example, and as we saw, race and gender being one kind of strike against. So girl students and minority students having kind of less embodied capital, if this was embodied capital, and therefore having less kind of power in this field, less ability to accrue of power, and so therefore inequality recreates itself. So that's a quick 1-2 on Bourdieu's argument. Let me pause really quick. We'll come back and I'll take you through these two sociologists that have been thinking that maybe Bourdieu's argument isn't totally correct. Right back.